I met Dr. Joe Weiss at the Chopra Center last year while several of us were working with Deepak Chopra and Rudy Tanzi on self-directed biological transformation. We were having some really good training and talks at the Chopra Center, and Dr. Joe Weiss happened to be there. He was sitting in, and he ended up being a very important part of the study because he added the work on microbiome. And I think I'm going to let Dr. Weiss explain microbiome to you, but remember, Dr. Weiss is the man who says we have two brains. I'm going to let him explain that as well. Thank you, Dr. Weiss.
Thank you, Glenda. Thank you, Joseph. It's a pleasure to be here. The time obviously is limited. I'm in a dangerous position between you and lunch. But I actually have the advantage of the lovely Gina Murdoch between you and lunch right after my program. So I'm going to stretch your brain, stretch your imaginations. And Gina's going to stretch your body, and then you'll have lunch. What I'd like to talk with you about is something that's been around for a long time, and you've heard about it. And I'm sure you have all experienced it. It has to do with gut instincts, gut feelings, gut sensation, a deep sensation within, sort of an intuitive sense. And what I'd like to share with you, the science of gut instincts has expanded dramatically over the years, so much so that many people now believe, and correctly so, that the gut actually is a second brain. And I will suggest to you that it's actually perhaps the first brain. And they're all interrelated, all intertwined. And they are intimately involved with each other. The brain and the gut communicate in a bidirectional fashion. The brain communicates with the gut communicates with the brain. And what I'll share with you is it's not just the gut that's communicating with the brain, it's the microbiome, which are the organisms that live within us and on us, the microbes, and the diet, which is interrelated. So there's a lot to cover in the 20 or so minutes that I have. And with your permission, I'd like to share with you that there is a concern with time. Oops, did I hit the wrong switch? There we go. I thought I'd make the sign up for Joseph, who's in charge of the time clock here. It sort of feels as soon as we start, the stop sign is up, that we have to stop. And there's a lot of material to cover, so if you'll bear with me, I'd like to share with you a lot of material, but I'll also share with you a real speedy way that you don't have to worry, you don't have to take notes during this program. I'll share all this information with you. I'm a physician, I'm a gastroenterologist. I'm actually very empathetic. I have great empathy for my patients and for you. Now, as a gastroenterologist, I'm always a little bit concerned if I tell people I'm a gastroenterologist, they're going to bother me during any social event, telling me all about their bowel problems, and I'll have no end of it. So I've changed my professional position. I now consider myself a forensic psychoproctologist. But I am empathetic, and listening to the program on flow, I'll have to share with you that I did have an experience with flow when I was 11 years old, which I've never forgotten. Time literally stood still. And I think it impacted me dramatically and probably led to my career path in gastroenterology and the microbiome. I was in a horizontal position in midair, flying through the air as a superhero. I didn't have my Superman cape on, but I was playing hide and seek, and I was on a farm. And in this horizontal position, I had tripped just before I assumed the horizontal position. Time stood still as I was flying head first into a 10-foot-high pile behind the chicken coops of chicken shit and feathers. So I was tarred and feathered in the microbiome and my career choice. And that's one reason why I have great empathy for you folks. So much empathy that what I'm going to be speaking about, I have actually put together as a handout, and it will be a book. It's about 30-some pages long, and I'm offering it to you gratis because it's not quite a book yet. It's on a website where I have published other books, and the link is on the bottom of this image, which I'd like to share with Glenda and Joseph. I think we should rename the Aspen Brain Lab the Aspen Brain Gut Lab after this talk, if you agree with me and you share how much information that you have. But I, all righty. But we basically have all the information I'll be presenting to you on a PDF handout, which you're more than willing or more than happy to have, and I hope you enjoy it. If you give me feedback, so as I write the book, I can improve it, that would be appreciated. I do want to share with you, we've already heard a couple comments about dimensions, and there's a great cartoon on the back of the handout about a young lady going to another dimension. We don't have time to go into details, but how many here are familiar with the Mobius strips? Looks like quite a few are not. I would suggest to you, and it's worth doing, it takes about 1 minute to create one. It takes about a minute to cut along that marked line along the center. Virtually everyone believes that if you cut along the center line of a single strip of paper, you'll end up with 2 separate pieces of paper, right? That makes sense. That's not what happens, but I'll let you be surprised on your own. So for those who are the students who are interested in math and geometry and dimensions, it's a great way to express the amazing dimension going from 2 dimensions to 1 dimension with the Mobius strip. I also like to share with you, do you remember the Gary Larson cartoon where the student raises his hand to the teacher and says, may I be excused, my brain is full? After a full morning, my brain is pretty full, but I'd like to share with you, you've got a lot more room in your brain than you might imagine. In fact, the capacity, the memory capacity of the brain is astronomical. You're talking about billions of gigabytes of memory capability. So I'm going to share with you some more material, but again, you don't have to remember it. It's all on the handout for you. Now, you're probably familiar with this image of the brain, starting off with the reptilian brain at the base. That's our primitive brain, which is our life functions, breathing, circulation, etc. Above that, the limbic brain, emotional or feeling brain, and above that, the neocortex, the rational or thinking brain. There is another connection, and the connection has to do with the gut. The gut actually has the oldest nervous system in evolution, and it is intimately tied in to the brain. And in fact, it can be called the second brain, and I would suggest to you it probably should be called the first brain. Michael Gerson, who's over at Columbia, basically wrote a book called The Second Brain about 10 years ago. It was a landmark book. And this is just one image of a cross-section of the gut showing the thousands of miles of neural fibers going throughout the gut. Now, you're familiar with a number of neurotransmitters. Serotonin, you've heard about. Did you know that 95% of the serotonin in the entire body is created and stored in the gut? Only 5% in the brain. 50% of dopamine is in the gut. There are dozens of neurotransmitters in the gut. There are dozens of hormones in the gut. The communication pathway between the gut and the brain is pretty amazing and pretty intense. One of the cranial nerves is called the vagus nerve. Vagus in Latin means wanderer. It wanders from the brain down through the chest, touching upon the heart and the lungs, going down into the abdomen, touching on all of the gastrointestinal tract and kidneys and other internal organs and spleen, going down into the pelvis, dealing with reproductive organs as well. The vagus nerve is amazing. What was not apparent at first was we knew the brain communicated with the rest of the body through the vagus nerve. What was not known was that there was a bidirectional component. The vagus nerve communicates with the brain. In fact, it's 80% of the information is going from the vagus nerve to the brain, from the gut to the brain. Now, we talked about depression earlier today, and one of the treatments for depression was FDA approved about 10 years ago. You may or may not have heard about it, but you should pay attention to it. It's neural stimulation of the vagus nerve. Electrical stimulation of the vagus nerve is used for treatment-resistant depression. It works in about 30% of cases, which isn't perfect, but it's certainly great for those who have treatment-resistant depression. There is an immense interest in the vagus nerve and its pathway to the brain, and I would suggest to you when it comes down to meditation, breathing, yoga, a lot of these alternative approaches actually impact the vagus nerve as well, and their improvement of depression may be related to the same concept. We're talking about the vagus nerve dealing with neurotransmitters affecting the brain, affecting mood, cognition, and a number of illnesses such as depression. When it comes to communication pathways between the gut and the brain, there are multiple pathways. It's not just the vagus nerve, although that's certainly an important one. And as the slide illustrates, you have not only the neurologic connection, you actually have a connection through enteric hormones. Hormones, as we just heard, the most recent hormone dealing with longevity, there are about 60 known hormones, and you can rest assured there are dozens more yet to be discovered. So hormones play an important role in messaging, sending messages different parts of the body. One obviously is the neural tract, the other is through the circulation with hormones. Immune cells also communicate with the brain from the gut. The microbes, the very bottom of the slide is showing what is inside the lumen, the hollow portion of the gut. When you think about the gut, you think of the intestinal tract. It doesn't sound terribly attractive, but without it, obviously you wouldn't be here. You need it to absorb nutrients. We're all looking forward to lunch. But we're a large organism. The body is pretty large. The gut itself is a fairly slender, long tube, sort of a snake-like organ. But if you think about it, it's really a tunnel. The mouth is one opening. The anus is the other opening. This is a long tunnel, and it's the external environment that is traveling within our bodies. So whatever is within the lumen of the gut is outside of our bodies. It's external. And that makes the gut a major location for the immune system to protect it from invaders, whether it's toxins, microbes, hallucinogens, whatever have you. This is the interaction, this is the boundary between our body and the external environment. Now, humans are interesting creatures, and you think about it, well, we've got a long, slender gut, that's not going to do it. One of the design features to increase the surface area of the gut are called villi. They're finger-like projections. In fact, Mark Twain once spoke of Switzerland. He said this would be a very large country if they could flatten out the mountains, much like Aspen. So if you think about the villi, much like mountain peaks, it increases the surface area. The surface area of the gut with all the villi actually exceeds that of a championship tennis court. The gut has more surface area than any other organ in the body, much more than skin. So the metabolites that the microbiome produces, and by the way, the microbiome, the organisms within us, they outnumber us. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But these metabolites that they produce are absorbed. They're introduced into the body either by absorption through the cells lining the gut or between what are called the tight junctions between the lining cells. Have you heard the phrase leaky gut? Leaky gut is where those tight junctions give a little bit more lapse way for microbial metabolites or other external influences to come into the body. So where the boundary has been breached, the boundary of the body and the external environment has been breached. And there are also other components such as fatty acids, short-chain fatty acids, neurotransmitters, hormones, all generated by the microbiome, all communicating with the brain. One other aspect of communication is through the olfactory nerve, which is cranial nerve 1. The olfactory nerve is the only nerve in the body where the external receptors are actually exposed to the outside environment. They're in the roof area of your nose. It's called a cribriform plate. When you smell a perfume or a food or something obnoxious, the receptors of the olfactory nerve have been touched, bonded to that olfactory product that is in the air, is in the atmosphere. And actually, it has touched the nerve. It has bonded to the nerve, sending the signal to the brain. So if you think about it, some of them you notice, you smell, you appreciate. Others may be more subtle, such as pheromones. You may not even smell it, but it can have an effect on mood, can have an effect on cognition. For those who are in the area where they are smoking the marijuana, if you have the little vapors in the air and you inhale someone else's toke, you're going to get an effect from it because it binds to your olfactory nerve. Now, I do want to go and digress for just a moment to share with you evolution is fascinating, and we humans sometimes take a while to learn things that we should have learned a little bit earlier. I do have a different program called Medical Wisdom, WIS, D-U-M-B, about the dumb things we've done in medicine and how many mistakes we've made and how we still fail to learn from examples. So when we talk about the microbiome in greater detail, and I'm going to share with you how many people are now advocating probiotics. How many people here are taking probiotics? A good number, and probiotics make sense, and I'll share with you they do make sense, but I also caution you to be careful. There is a tremendous amount of marketing and hype for probiotics, nutraceuticals, supplements. There is evidence some of them are actually beneficial. Most of them do not have the evidence of benefit, and I have no doubt that we're going to find in the years to come that some are actually harmful. Do we know which are which? Unfortunately, not at the moment. We're very early in the understanding of the microbiome and what the different organisms do. So I'd like to go back in history for just a moment and share with you, by the way, this is sort of the amazing benefits of probiotics. Well, that's an optimistic look. I mean, that's great, but I would be very, very cautious about jumping whole hog. On the upper left is Marie Curie, who was a Polish national with Pierre in Paris. They won the Nobel Prize for working on radioactivity. They identified polonium, named after her native Poland, identified radium. Radium became a great commercial success. They used it and painted it on watch dials because it glows in the dark, so you can see your clock at night. Became very, very popular. Big corporations. In fact, there was a radium company of Colorado in Denver. The industry grew. In fact, the use of radium was encouraged by physicians, by the industry. It was promoted as being life-giving, life-altering, life-beneficial, disease prevention. It was actually used, and I know this sounds really strange, but it was actually used in fabric for infant clothing. It was used as suppositories for men and for women to enhance sexual function. It was used in so many ways that it becomes unbelievable. Radium toothpaste, radium cosmetics to give you that glow. It was everywhere. And to tell you how science works, the first warning actually came from the University of California at Berkeley. This is well before the Manhattan Project. About 10 years before the Manhattan Project, they had the first cyclotron, which was a large machine, and the scientists working with it thought there must be some danger to radiation. Let's do an experiment. They put a healthy mouse in a little chamber, turned on the cyclotron, went back a moment later with a low dose of radiation to see what happened. The mouse was dead. They said, holy crap. They went back and got another healthy mouse, did the same thing, mouse was dead. Radiation is dangerous. They put out the warning, and there was a great controversy, and it made the news, and it's a fascinating story to read. You can look up a story called Radium Girls, about girls who worked in the radium factories painting watch dials about the tragic consequences of radium. Make a long story short, the radium warnings came out. It wasn't until 10 years later with the Manhattan Project, they had visiting scientists. They wanted to see this demonstration with the mouse again to show how dangerous radiation was. They put the healthy mouse in. They flipped the switch on the cyclotron, but there was a power failure. They couldn't do the experiment. The visiting dignitaries left, and they went to take the mouse out of the chamber. The mouse was dead. They were stunned. They found out what happened is the mouse never died of radiation. All the mice died from asphyxiation. The chamber was too small. There wasn't enough air inside. Science at its best. Now, DNA has been famous for about 60 or so years. Now, the story behind DNA, you probably are well familiar with Watson and Crick, Nobel laureates. Do you know there's another person involved in the story, and tragically, Rosalind Franklin's name is often not remembered. If it wasn't for her, there would have been no Watson and Crick fame. She's the one who did the X-ray crystallography that demonstrated the double helix. She died of ovarian cancer in her 30s. And since you can't give a Nobel Prize to someone who is deceased, she's forgotten, but she was a pioneer. The DNA in the last 60 years has gone amazing distances in our understanding of microbes, microbiology, genomics, genetics, everything. By the way, a chimpanzee and a human, if you look at the DNA, 98.4% identical. Pretty amazing. Now, DNA is the key. And now that they have unraveled the code with the Human Genome Project, basically it says, God, the Human Genome Code's been unraveled. And God says, damn hackers, now I have to change the password. By the way, for those who are concerned about evolution and creationists, don't worry, there's a great cartoon that answers it all. God basically declaring, let there be evolution. That makes sense. And evolution is amazing. If you go back, we all came from the same very first unicellular organism. We shared the same genes. And if you think of genetics as a universal language. You know, on Earth, we have thousands of languages, dozens of alphabets. The language of genetics, the genetic code, is a universal language. All life forms share that same language. And through that language, they communicate with each other. Since we all evolved from the same single unicellular organism, we are related distantly to microbes, to elephants, to whales. We're all related. We share genes. There's a great deal of gene overlap. Chimpanzee, bonobos, and humans, 98.4% overlap. Well, we're closely related. What about us and microbes? How far apart are we? Over 30%, some say 35% of the genes between the lowliest microbe and humans are identical. They're the same. So when the microbes speak in our genetic language, they communicate with our brain. And the communication is extensive. By the way, this is Sidney Brenner, who got the Nobel Prize for his work with the roundworm Caenorhabditis elegans, give you the impression of how important one single gene can be. And we'll talk about this in an afternoon program. One gene, when it's manipulated, can extend the lifespan of this roundworm tenfold. An example, if they had the same gene in humans and you manipulated it, you can go from being 100 years of age to 1,000 years of age. Guess what? The gene does exist in humans. It's identical. It's an identical gene. In fact, a drug was found. Remember, microbes produce all sorts of drugs. A lot of the pharmaceuticals out there, a lot of the products that people use are derived from microbes. It was found at the base of the Moa statues on Easter Island. It's called rapamycin because the island's name was Rapa Nui. Rapamycin targets that gene. It's an FDA-approved drug. Don't go out and take it for this reason. But it is being studied for life enhancement and longevity. By the way, genes are amazing, and there are thousands. In the humans, we have about 23,000 genes. If you think about it, humans are actually a superorganism. We are more than just human. We are microbial as well, and they do communicate with each other. When it comes to the number of cells in the body, the humans are about 10% human cells, 90% microbial cells. When you go to genomics, humans are about 1% human, 99% microbial genes. Remember, it's a universal language. They are communicating. When it comes down to the data that you need to collect to analyze genomics, it's astronomical. You're talking about no supercomputer on Earth can handle it yet. And yet we have all these microbes, and there are millions of species of microbes. They each have thousands of genes. The possible biologic products, the numbers, are in the quintillions. It's 10 to the 60th in terms of exponential growth. Amazing numbers. In fact, there are 100 trillion microbes in the human colon. You say you call this living, but we are outnumbered by these microbes, and they are communicating with us. This is simply a picture of exotic fruit. Think about exotic fruits that numbered in the quadrillions of different exotic fruits. Do we know if they're safe to eat or not? Do we know if they're safe to enjoy or not? Well, some of them could be like ricin, a small grain of poison and you're dead. Some of them could be like poison ivy. Others can be hallucinogens. We don't know. And yet that's where I'm concerned about the probiotics coming in. There's so many that are being marketed. We don't know what these microbes are going to do. For some people, they may well be beneficial. A lot of it probably has to do with genomics as well. If you have a propensity, it could be beneficial. If it's not beneficial, it can affect the brain, and we may end up with an out-of-order sign. By the way, I just want to share with you, for those who are cat lovers, there is a concern with cats. They have and harbor a parasite called Toxoplasma gondii. If you're pregnant or know a pregnant person, please encourage them to stay away from the cat. The parasite is common. It's found in most of the human population as well, although it's designed to be in cats and mice. It affects the mice. When they get this parasite, they actually change their behavior. They end up getting more likely to be eaten by a cat so that the microbe, the pathogen, parasite, can continue its life cycle. When it happens, It happens. By the way, there's another study, interesting, microbes actually have to do with obesity. So that as you look at changing your microbial content, you may actually say, well, I'm fat and it's not because of what I'm eating, blame your microbes. And there is science to agree with that. So you take the fat mouse microbes, put them in a skinny mouse, the skinny mouse gets fat. Take the skinny microbes, put them inside the fat mouse gets skinny. So this is another reason you might want to enjoy your lunch. So when you think about probiotics, think of them as the equivalent of antibiotics. Would you take any antibiotic that's put on the marketplace by a company promoting it unless you knew it was beneficial? No, so think twice. So when it comes to the gut microbiome, it's in your poop. There is gold at the end of the rainbow. Do we know what's in that gold and what part is gold and what is not? Not yet, but we will in the future. So thank you very much for your kind attention.